The first few weeks after the birth of our son were both overwhelming and magical. The sleepless nights, the endless feeding sessions, and the constant worry over every little thing were all a blur. But amidst the chaos, there was love. It felt like our family was finally complete. I remember holding my son for the first time, seeing his tiny hands curl around my fingers, and feeling a sense of fulfillment I had never known before. My wife, Sarah, and I had been through a lot in our years together. We were high school sweethearts, and after what seemed like an eternity of waiting, we had finally settled into the rhythm of life. We both wanted children, but the timing had always been off. When we found out we were expecting, I was elated. It felt like the next chapter in our story, a story I had hoped would last forever. But the reality of parenthood, the sleepless nights, and the stress of adjusting to our new life took its toll on both of us. I had noticed a subtle shift in Sarah's behavior shortly after we brought our baby home. At first, it was just small things. She seemed a little more distant, a little more distracted. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to wonder if it was more than just the exhaustion of new motherhood. I tried to be understanding. I knew she was going through a lot. I tried to help as much as I could, even though I was tired too. I would take the baby at night so she could get some sleep, and I tried to make sure she was eating well and taking care of herself. But despite my efforts, something felt off. It was subtle at first, just the way she would look at her phone with an odd expression or the way she would pull away when I reached for her hand. There was a sense of distance between us, a distance I couldn't quite understand. I thought maybe it was just the stress of being new parents, but deep down, I had a nagging feeling that something more was going on. Then came the night that changed everything. It was late, and I had just come back from the store. I noticed her phone sitting on the kitchen counter, screen facing up. The notification light was flashing, signaling a new message. I didn't think much of it at first, but as I walked by, I glanced down and saw the name that made my heart sink: Mark. Mark was an old friend of Sarah's. They had been close before we got together, but over the years, their communication had faded. At least, that's what I had thought. My heart raced as I picked up the phone. The message was a simple one: *, can't wait to see you tonight. I miss you. *. My hands started shaking, and for a moment, I didn't know what to do. I wanted to confront her right then and there, but I was scared. I didn't want to believe what I was seeing. But deep down, I knew. Something inside me told me that the distance between us wasn't just about the baby or the stress of our new life. It was about something far deeper, something I had never expected. I put the phone back down and walked away. I needed time to think, to process what I had just discovered. The weight of the realization hit me hard. My wife, the woman I had trusted with my heart, had betrayed me. And the worst part was, I didn't know how to confront her without completely unraveling everything we had built. But one thing was clear: our life was never going to be the same again. Chapter 2: The Confrontation. The next few days were a blur. I could barely focus on anything except the haunting words I had seen on Sarah's phone. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her message to Mark flashing in my mind. It was as if a cloud of doubt and betrayal had settled over me, and no matter how hard I tried to shake it off, it lingered. I tried to act normal. For the sake of our newborn son, I put on a mask. I took care of him, changed his diapers, fed him, and rocked him to sleep. But inside, I was falling apart. Every time Sarah spoke to me, I found myself analyzing her every word, every glance. I wondered if she was hiding something else, something deeper. It wasn't until that weekend that I finally decided I couldn't go on like this any longer. I had to confront her. I had to know the truth, even if it shattered everything. It was a Saturday afternoon, and Sarah had gone out to run some errands. The baby was napping in his crib, and I had a few hours to myself. My heart was racing as I stood in the kitchen, staring at the phone she had left on the counter. I knew it wasn't right to go through her things, but the doubt had consumed me. I needed answers. I picked up the phone again. This time, I wasn't just looking at one message. I scrolled back through their conversation. It wasn't just casual talk. It was intimate, flirtatious, full of inside jokes and promises to meet up. There were two pictures of them together from a few months ago. A part of me felt sick, but another part was furious. How long had this been going on? How many times had I missed the signs? I was about to put the phone down when I heard the front door open. My heart leaped into my throat, and I quickly shoved the phone back in its place. Sarah walked in, carrying groceries, her face lighting up when she saw me standing there. But I could see the hesitation in her eyes. Something had changed between us. She knew it. I knew it. She put the bags on the kitchen counter and walked over to kiss me, but I stepped back. My stomach churned, and I struggled to keep my voice steady. "Sarah, we need to talk." Her expression immediately shifted from warmth to concern. "What's wrong?" "I saw the messages on your phone. The ones with Mark." The words tumbled out of my mouth, heavier than I expected. The silence that followed was deafening. Her face paled, and she backed away, her hand instinctively reaching for the countertop as if she needed support. I can explain," she stammered, her eyes darting around, unable to meet mine. I didn't know what I expected, but it wasn't this. I wanted her to come clean, to tell me everything, but instead, she looked like a deer caught in headlights. "You can explain," I repeated, my voice rising. "How do you explain this, Sarah? How do you explain that you've been texting him, meeting him behind my back? How long has this been going on?" She took a shaky breath, and I could see her eyes fill with tears. "I never meant for this to happen," she whispered. "It wasn't like you think." "Then what is it like?" I shot back, feeling a wave of anger wash over me. What am I supposed to believe? That this is just some mistake? That I'm being paranoid? "You've been messaging him like it's nothing." "It wasn't like that," she said, her voice breaking. "It's complicated. I never meant for you to find out. I'm so sorry." I couldn't take it anymore. The betrayal, the lies, it all hit me like a freight train. I turned away, pacing in the living room, trying to get my bearings. I couldn't understand why she had done this. Why with him? Mark. Of all people. I thought about everything we had been through: our wedding, the pregnancy, the birth of our son, and it all seemed to lose its meaning in that moment. Finally, I stopped pacing and turned to face her. "So, what now? What do we do, Sarah?" She wiped away a tear, but it didn't seem to be enough. "I don't know," she said quietly. "I've messed up. I've hurt you, and I don't even know how to fix it. I don't even know if I can. But I love you, I swear. I'm so sorry." "I need space," I replied coldly. My words felt like daggers, but I didn't care. I needed time to think. Time to figure out if I could ever trust her again, if this marriage could survive. "I can't look at you right now." I left the room and went to the nursery, where I picked up our son. I held him in my arms, his tiny body warm against mine, and I felt an overwhelming wave of guilt. I had always promised to protect him. But how could I protect him from this? How could I protect him from the mess we were about to become? The silence between Sarah and me stretched on for what felt like forever, but neither of us knew where to go from here. Chapter 3, The Fallout. The days that followed were unbearable. The atmosphere in our home was thick with tension. I tried to go through the motions for our son's sake, but every time I looked at Sarah, I was reminded of the betrayal. Every smile she gave him, every soft word, felt like a reminder of the life she had hidden from me. I couldn't shake the image of her with him, the way she had looked at Mark, the way she'd responded to him. At night, when our son was asleep, the house felt eerily quiet. We both retreated to opposite corners of our lives, unable to bridge the gulf between us. I spent my nights staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my mind. How had I not seen the signs? How had I been so blind? Was I just too trusting, too naive? The self-doubt was suffocating, but the anger I felt towards Sarah burned even brighter. How could she do this to me? To us? I wanted answers, but each time I asked, I felt like I was pulling at a thread that would unravel everything. The only thing she kept repeating was that it had been a mistake, that it was a moment of weakness, and that she regretted it more than anything. But regret didn't change the fact that she had crossed a line. After the confrontation, Sarah had tried to reach out to me. She sent messages, called, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. How could I? Every time I heard her voice, it only reminded me of the lies. The trust that had taken years to build had been shattered in an instant, and I wasn't sure how to begin putting the pieces back together. It wasn't until a week later that I finally agreed to sit down with her again. I knew I couldn't keep avoiding the issue, it was eating away at me. But when I walked into the living room that day, I found myself hesitating. She was sitting on the couch, her face red from crying, her hands twisting in her lap. It looked like she had been waiting for me to come to her, but I wasn't sure if I was ready. "I've been thinking," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. "And I think I need to hear the truth." "All of it?" Her eyes widened, and she nodded, as if this was the moment she had been waiting for. "I've been honest with you, I swear. I messed up. I was lonely, and I don't know how it happened. Mark was there, and we started talking again. One thing led to another, and it just happened." Her voice broke as she spoke, and I could see the guilt written all over her face. But even as she spoke, a part of me couldn't help but wonder if she was telling me the full story. Was it really just a one-time thing, or was there more to it than she was letting on? "You're telling me that it was just a one-time mistake?" I asked, my voice low, filled with disbelief. "That you just went to him because you were lonely? Is that all?" She nodded quickly, her eyes filled with tears. "Yes, that's all. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted this to happen. I love you, I swear." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that it was just a moment of weakness, a lapse in judgment. But the doubt still gnawed at me. The thought of her with someone else, sharing a part of herself that should have been mine, was almost too much to bear. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again." "I understand," she whispered. "I understand if you can't. But I will do whatever it takes to make it right. I'm so sorry for everything." I wanted to scream, to rage against everything that had happened, but I couldn't find the energy. It felt like I was drowning in a sea of uncertainty, and I wasn't sure which way was up anymore. Chapter 4, The Decision. The next few weeks were a blur of confusion, pain, and self-reflection. I found myself torn between what I knew was right for me and what I felt was best for our son. I couldn't deny that I still loved Sarah, but the trust we had built was gone, and I wasn't sure if it could ever be repaired. Every time I looked at her, the image of her with Mark crept into my mind. Every word she spoke felt like a lie, even though I knew deep down she was truly sorry. But it didn't matter, she had crossed a line, and I wasn't sure if I could ever move past that. In the meantime, Sarah kept pushing for answers, trying to get me to tell her what I wanted, what I needed. But I didn't have an answer. I didn't know what I wanted. All I knew was that I couldn't keep living like this. One evening, after a particularly difficult day of questioning everything, I finally decided to take a step back. I couldn't make any decisions in the heat of the moment, so I asked Sarah for space. I need time to think, I told her, my voice barely a whisper. I need time to figure out what I want. She nodded, her face a mixture of relief and sadness. I'll give you space, she said, her voice breaking. But please know that I'm here when you're ready. I want to fix this, I want us to work. But I'll understand if you can't. As I sat in the silence that followed, I realized that there was no easy answer. I loved Sarah, but I couldn't ignore the damage that had been done. The question now was whether I could rebuild what we had, or if we were better off going our separate ways. And deep down, I knew I had to make that decision not just for me, but for our son. Because no matter what happened between Sarah and me, he deserved a stable, loving environment. I only hoped that whatever choice I made would lead us toward healing, even if it meant walking away from the life I thought I had. Chapter 5, The Longest Road. Time seemed to stretch out endlessly in the weeks that followed. After I asked for space, Sarah and I lived like strangers under the same roof. There was no more intimacy, no more casual conversations, just a quiet, unbearable tension that permeated everything. We continued to co-parent our son, but it felt mechanical, like two people who were doing what needed to be done but had forgotten why they had ever come together in the first place. At night, I would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Some nights, I wondered if I could ever forgive Sarah. I loved her, but was love enough to erase the pain of betrayal? Other nights, I convinced myself that maybe we could rebuild, that time and effort would heal the wounds if we were both committed. But on those nights, I would look over at her side of the bed, now empty, and the reality of what had happened would crush me all over again. I began to notice things that had once seemed insignificant. Her laugh no longer sounded the same, it was more hollow, forced. Her eyes lacked the warmth they once had. I couldn't help but wonder if these changes had always been there, and I had just failed to see them. Or had she become a different person in the wake of her betrayal? Maybe the Sarah I thought I knew was never really there. I spent a lot of time alone, walking around the neighborhood, reflecting. I talked to close friends, some of whom encouraged me to move on, to find a life for myself away from the pain. Others told me to give it time, to see if Sarah could prove she was truly committed to fixing what she had broken. But every time I talked to someone, I came away with more confusion. No one had a clear answer. And honestly, I wasn't sure I was ready to make a choice either. One day, Sarah came to me with an idea. She wanted us to go to therapy, to see if we could work through this together. I had been resistant to the idea at first. I felt like we had already tried everything: trust, communication, love, and nothing had been enough to prevent her from making that choice. But as I listened to her speak, something shifted. I saw the desperation in her eyes. It wasn't just about fixing our marriage for her, it was about proving to me that she was still committed, that she wanted to earn back the trust she had shattered. "I don't want to lose you," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I messed up, and I know I hurt you. But I love you. I love our family. I want to be better. Please, let's try. Please." I could see how much this meant to her, how deeply she regretted what she had done. But the question remained, did I still love her enough to try? Could I really open myself up to the possibility of healing when I was so afraid of being hurt again? I didn't have the answers, but I agreed to go. I wasn't ready to give up on us entirely, but I also knew that if we were going to try, it had to be more than just words. It had to be about both of us making an effort to rebuild what had been lost. Chapter 6, The Therapy Sessions. We started couples therapy the following week. I didn't expect miracles. I didn't expect some magic fix that would make everything go back to the way it had been before. But I hoped it would give us a way to communicate, to understand each other in a way that we hadn't been able to in the wake of everything. At first, the sessions were uncomfortable. The therapist asked us questions that forced us to confront truths we weren't ready to face. I could feel the walls between Sarah and me growing higher with every question. But after a few weeks, something started to change. I began to see the vulnerability in Sarah that I had been missing. She wasn't just defending herself anymore, she was owning her mistakes, her guilt, and the hurt she had caused me. She explained how she had felt neglected and lost after the birth of our son, how the stress of motherhood and our changing dynamic had pushed her to make a decision that she now regretted every day. I didn't feel like myself anymore, she said in one session, her voice raw with emotion. I felt like I was losing who I was, and when Mark reached out, it felt like a way to reconnect with something from my past. I thought it would make me feel better, but all it did was tear us apart. And I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. It was the first time in weeks I had heard her speak with such honesty. It was the first time I felt like she truly understood the weight of what she had done, and maybe, just maybe, she was willing to do the work to fix it. But the work wasn't easy. There were moments when I felt like I was suffocating, trapped in a cycle of questions and doubts. The therapist encouraged us to talk openly about our feelings, but sometimes I just didn't know how to express what was going on in my heart. How could I put into words the way her betrayal had shaken the foundation of everything I thought we had? How could I explain the constant fear that I would never be able to trust her again? Still, we kept going. Sarah made a point to be open, to show up for me in ways that she hadn't before. She asked for my forgiveness, even when it felt like I wasn't ready to give it. She tried to be more present, more involved in our son's life, and it was clear she was putting in the effort. It wasn't enough to erase the past, but it was a start. Chapter 7, A Glimmer of Hope. Months passed, and slowly, we began to find a new rhythm. It wasn't perfect. There were still days when the weight of what had happened felt too heavy to bear. There were still moments when I questioned whether I had made the right choice, whether I was simply lying to myself about the possibility of redemption. But through the hard work, the difficult conversations, and the healing process, I started to see glimpses of the woman I had once fallen in love with. We weren't the same. We couldn't be. The trust that had been shattered couldn't be put back together overnight. But as I looked at Sarah, I realized that maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild something new, a new foundation, one that was stronger because we had both fought for it. Our son, now growing and thriving, was our constant reminder of why we were doing this. He deserved parents who could love each other, even if it meant starting from scratch. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that, for the first time in a long while, we were trying. And that was enough. For now. Chapter 8, The Road to Healing. Time had a funny way of softening the edges of pain. It wasn't that the hurt went away completely, but as the days and months passed, the sharpness dulled. There were still moments of doubt, still times when I would catch Sarah looking at her phone or hear her laughing with friends, and the fear would creep back in. Was she still hiding something? Was she still the woman who had betrayed me, or was I just seeing shadows where there were none? The lingering question of trust weighed heavily on both of us, but we were learning to live with it. We continued therapy, and while it didn't magically fix everything, it became a safe space for us to work through our feelings. For Sarah, it was a chance to confront the reasons behind her actions, to understand the underlying issues that had led her to make that devastating choice. And for me, it was a place to voice my anger, my hurt, and my confusion without fear of judgment. Slowly, I started to see that Sarah wasn't the same person who had made that mistake. She was trying, truly trying, to rebuild herself. She was taking responsibility for her actions and facing the consequences head-on. One day, we were sitting in the therapist's office when Sarah broke down, tears streaming down her face. "I hurt you in a way that I can't undo," she said between sobs. I hate that I've done this to you. I never wanted to lose you. I love you more than I've ever loved anyone, and I'm so sorry. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the same rage when she apologized. Instead, I felt something softer, something closer to forgiveness. I wasn't ready to say I had fully forgiven her yet, but I understood, in that moment, that her remorse was real. And as much as I wanted to hold on to the anger, I also knew that if I didn't find a way to let go, I would be trapped in the past forever. That night, after the session, Sarah and I sat on the couch, our son playing contentedly at our feet. The silence between us wasn't as heavy as it had been. There was no tension in the air, no walls separating us. It felt different, calmer, more open. And for the first time, I wasn't filled with the same fear of what had happened. I wasn't focused on the past. Instead, I allowed myself to feel the flicker of hope that had been absent for so long. Maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. Chapter 9, Trusting Again. As the months wore on, the new normal began to take shape. Sarah worked hard to prove herself to me, not through grand gestures or empty promises, but through small, consistent actions. She was there for me in ways I hadn't experienced before. She listened. She was patient. She apologized not just with words, but with her actions, showing me that she understood the depth of the hurt she had caused. It wasn't easy for me. Every day, I fought the impulse to second-guess her, to dig into old wounds. There were times when I would feel the anxiety rise in my chest, when I would think about her past betrayal and wonder if I could ever trust her again. But every time I thought about walking away or giving up, I remembered why we were fighting. We were fighting for our family, for our son, for our love, and for the life we had built together. Slowly, the walls between us began to fall. We had a lot of hard conversations, but they weren't as painful anymore. They were productive. We started to communicate better, to understand each other's fears and hopes. We made a conscious effort to create new memories, to build a future that was grounded in honesty, respect, and, most importantly, trust. One night, months after the confrontation, Sarah and I went out for dinner alone, the first time we had done so in what felt like forever. Our son stayed with his grandparents, and for the first time in ages, I felt a sense of calm. As we sat across from each other, sharing a meal, it felt like we were dating again. There was no tension, no anxiety. Just the two of us, remembering what had brought us together in the first place. "I've missed this," Sarah said, looking at me with a tenderness I hadn't seen in months. "I've missed you." "I've missed you too," I replied, my voice soft. It wasn't the same as before, but it was something new, something worth holding on to. That night, as we drove home in the quiet darkness, I realized that while we could never go back to what we had before, we had the chance to create something even better. We were no longer just trying to survive the pain of the past. We were learning how to move forward together. Chapter 10, A New Beginning. It wasn't a clean slate. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. But after everything, after the heartache, the betrayal, the therapy, and the long nights of uncertainty, we were stronger than we had been before. We weren't perfect, and we both still had a lot of work to do, but we had found a way to rebuild. We found a new kind of love, one that wasn't without its scars, but one that was built on the understanding of what it took to survive. The past would always be a part of us, but it no longer held the power to define us. We had learned to trust each other again, not because we were naive or because we thought everything would be perfect, but because we were committed to doing the work together. Our son was growing up in a home that, while imperfect, was filled with love. We made sure to tell him every day that we loved him, that he was the most important thing in our lives. And we promised ourselves that no matter what, we would always be there for him. The future was still uncertain, and I couldn't predict what would happen next. But for the first time in a long while, I felt hope. Maybe not the kind of hope I had once had, but a deeper, more realistic kind of hope built on effort, understanding, and the belief that love, though tested, could endure. And as I looked at Sarah that night, her hand resting gently in mine, I knew that we were on the right path. The road ahead would never be easy, but we were ready to walk it together. F.